Good morning. It is February 26th. Happy to be back in History Month. This is the OTTLY. I am your host of the Common Sense Party podcast. Our mission to inform our listeners on topics that affect everyday person. Rate us, review us, give us 5 stars, give us 4 stars, give us 3 stars, give us 2 stars, give us any stars. Give us any stars, we just assume doing it properly. We're available where you get your podcast. You can check us out at Spotify, Amazon Music, Samsung Podcast, Pandora, Google Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube Music, and TuneIn. We're still trying to get help to get an Apple ID so we can inform more customers, more citizens. There you go, citizens. You could also support the podcast at Cash App and Zelle. That information is on the Spotify page front. You can contact us at the Common Sense Party Pod at gmail.com. We're also available on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Today, we're going to talk about how Mitch McConnell has been influenced by Trump, how they want to get rid of him, the border bill, and the primaries. Yes, the primaries. The primaries were just recently. So we will get started with what did Mitch McConnell say today? He said something pretty interesting.
This is a humanitarian and security crisis of historic proportions. And Senate Republicans have insisted, not just for months, but for years, that this urgent crisis demanded action. And it's now time for Congress to take action on supplemental national security legislation that finally meets those challenges head on.
He is still slurring. Ladies and gentlemen. I don't know why, but he's still slurring. Sounds like he is having a problem speaking. But this is Mr. Bannon talking about how he's a traitor to...
I believe two things. Byron Donalds also said, I believe two things. Byron Donalds also said, at this point, this is according to Congressman Donalds, this government doesn't deserve to be funded. So let me give you the strategic plan here. It's quite simple. I believe that we can make a move now on Mitch McConnell. I think this is the weakest Mitch McConnell's ever been. This is a complete disaster. He kept people in the dark. We got, Rosemary Jenks got it leaked. War Room put it up. They accused us of lying. They accused us of internet rumors. It turned out all to be true. And even worse, McConnell never got anybody into the loop, including guys like Wicker, and they're steamed. They're saying, you had us back this thing, and now you put this on us, and now there's a firestorm going. I believe two things.
They are pissed about the border bill. Who knows why, but McConnell actually backed out because he was in a closed door meeting today, and he said he was not backing it. Here is why I think the Republican Party will not win during this election season. Keep them poor, still sick, keep them stupid. Control women. If you are currently with this Republican Party, this is what they stand for, and why you stand with them, I don't know. But check this out. Here's the last one. This is Barrel.
Need to listen to it, even though I hate it, because you have to hear.
Fired up. You got to see what they're doing. That was the tip right now by federalizing the National Guard. They're saying, hey, Kristi Noem and Governor Stitz and all you big shots Republicans are going to have Abbott's back. You're going to have the citizens of Texas back. guess what? We're going to federalize your National Guard and take it away from you, and we're going to send that to Texas to cut the razor wire in front of you, to humiliate you and to break your spirit. This is what they're trying to do, to break your spirit.
Yeah, this media, this complicit propaganda media is just as bad as the NGOs. They're just as bad as the politicians in Washington, D.C. It's part of this three-legged stool of corruption that is destroying America from within. They are enemies of our nation. It's the enemies within that our founders warned us about us.
Mitch McConnell's an enemy of the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He's so tied to the CCP.
Absolutely.
That's how he made all his money. Came here as a broke country lawyer, right? Had no assets, no money, no nothing.
At least Rashida Tlaib stabs us in the front.
Absolutely.
It's Mitch McConnell that stabs us in the back.
Omar may stab us in the back.
She may too. Who knows? They'll stab us both ways.
She's Somalia first. Is that her?
Yeah. She represents Somalia. It's just a disgrace.
Okay. All that being said, as big and monumental historic this is, it was not the biggest news.
I've got an idea about the chips.
Okay,
I've got an idea.
Okay, Ben Bergquam going from a chief investigative reporter on our southern border to now the lead investigative reporter of the chips. Yesterday, on the road to the singularity, as we told you, this era, when you look back a couple of hundred years from now, one of the central things was the singularity. Homo sapiens on this side, Homo sapiens plus on the other. First time in, obviously, mankind's history. Something historic happened yesterday. Not so good, not so sure it was for the better, but we're going to get into it. Want to make sure all of our sponsors taking care of Home Title Lock right now. You can see Joe Allen in a second. Joe Allen was in this very city a couple weeks ago for Consumer Electronics Show. CES is where they show you the future.
These people are insane. But do you get your news from X? Yeah, they're turning against Mitch McConnell, and he is on their radar scales. Who knows what they're talking about now? But hey, they are still trying to get a hold of this border bill. But we're gonna see what's in the border bill. So we are trying to get you guys to come out and vote so this nonsense does not go forward. So again, we're gonna inform you what's happening with the bill that went to the Senate today. Check this out.
The most significant immigration reform proposal in a generation is now in the hands of the U.S. Senate after negotiators unveiled their compromise deal. The bipartisan deal would tighten asylum rules and allow for partial border shutdowns while increasing enforcement and opening some new avenues for legal migration.
The measure would also offer billions of dollars in assistance to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan for the defense of their respective borders. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins has been digging into the bill text and the immediate reactions to it. Lisa, it's good to see you. So this is a significant bill, 370 pages, as you well know, because I know you read through the entire thing. What are the highlights?
Okay, lots to talk about here, and want to help people understand there are two pieces to this bill. One, very big policy, especially on asylum, and then also big dollars when it comes to security here and abroad. So let's look at the overview of what's in here. First of all, let's talk about that immigration policy. There is an overhaul, especially of the asylum system, and then it also expands ICE detention in general. It would also allow for border closures of some sorts, meaning a stop in processing of asylum claims under certain circumstances. Now, as for that national security and international security piece, $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel. And if you look at all of the other dollars in here, it adds up to over $115 billion. And that money is essentially what President Biden initially requested. So really the focus here at this moment is on that immigration policy part. The senators who negotiated this say it was extraordinary they were even able to get to this point, but they now have critics from both sides, and they are stressing to them that they see this as a once-in-a-generation bill.
And this week, the Senate will begin to take action on a large national security package that includes a realistic, pragmatic, and the strongest solution to our border crisis in my lifetime.
Are we as Republicans going to have press conferences and complain the border's bad and then intentionally leave it open after the worst month in American history in December?
Those were two of the senators, along with a third Democrat, Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Those 3 senators are the ones who have been behind closed doors, weekends, nights for the past few months to negotiate this out, also with the Biden team on board this. But now they have to convince 60 senators. And right now, by my count, there's just 12, with most senators not saying how they feel
And
yet.
we should say that Omnis set to speak with Senator Murphy momentarily. President Biden, back when he was trying to salvage this deal, he said that he would shut the border down using the authority granted to the president in the bill. How would that work exactly?
This gets complex, but think about the problems that this bill is aiming to solve. That huge group of people that have been massing at the border, the surge there, many of them have crossed the border through our asylum policy, which has meant that because of a lack of detention space and the way our asylum policy works, they have entered the country almost automatically and waited processing sometimes for years in theory. So what this bill has done to try and address that is a few things with this shutting down the border concept. Let me explain this. This would be a new authority that would be given to DHS, and under this authority, DHS could immediately deport most of the migrants that were encountered at the border, as opposed to now when those migrants are generally allowed in the country to await processing. Now, this would go into effect optionally for the DHS secretary at 4,000 migrants a day. When we hit that average level, it would be mandatory at 5,000 migrants a day. Now, some conservatives have a big problem with those numbers, but that is much lower than the numbers that we saw in the past few weeks for sure. Also, I want to mention that that is a policy closure of the border. Of course, the border, there's still open land there. This does allow a DHS secretary to continue building a border wall if they choose.
And reading through the legislation, Lisa, what's clear is that it really dramatically reimagines the asylum system in this country. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I was texting with all kinds of people last night who didn't really believe me when I said what was in this in terms of the asylum system. So let's go through that first of all. And the asylum proposals in here. There would be a tougher standard for people to enter the country in that first screening. The standard would move to clear and convincing. Right now, it's just you have to show a significant possibility to prove that you've been persecuted. Now, a fraction of the people would pass that screening, a very small fraction. Most would probably be denied and put into removal processing and for deportation. Now, here's a big change. Right now, immigration judges are making most of these decisions. It would take the immigration judge completely out of the asylum process, and instead, asylum officers would make that decision. It's not even clear there would be a full interview. I'm not sure that lawyers would be present, though those applying could get a lawyer if they wanted. But then finally, this whole goal from this system is to do all of this in 180 days, the entire process. Now, while some on the left like that shortened process for asylum seekers, some of them are highly critical, saying this is so limited to asylum that it means very few people who really are fleeing persecution would make it through. There's
There's pushback. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. This is Andrea Flores from Forward.us.
Goal to reduce the amount of time it takes to review a claim. Unfortunately, this bill really goes overboard in making it even harder to get an already hard benefit. So it's adding a new asylum bar that would impact many of the people who otherwise might be able to qualify for protection.
So that's a concern that this is just really limiting, and maybe a human rights concern from the left. The senators who put this together say no.
Well, I was going to say there's pushback from the left, and of course there's pushback from the right. What's interesting, the GOP-friendly U.S. Chamber of Commerce came out today and said they support this legislation, says it has desperately needed reforms. Why are Republicans on the Hill? Why are they opposed to it? What are they saying?
And at least one Border Patrol organization, they say that while they do like the increase in detention to 50,000, they think this actually does not end that thing called catch and release. That while many migrants through this system would be given sort of what's called an alternative to detention, they would be having ankle bracelets. Some say that's not enough, and that this would leave people in this country able to kind of at will move around, which is something that the conservatives don't like, but which the Democrats say there's not proof that that's been a significant problem. I talked to Chad Wolf, who's a former Secretary of Homeland Security.
I don't think it ends catch and release. You know, they talk about single adults being detained. Well, they only have 50,000 beds, and I can guarantee you there is a lot more single adults coming across that border that need to be apprehended before they can be removed than 50,000.
Conservatives also wanted some things that were not in here. They wanted more limits on humanitarian parole. It's a win for the Biden White House that there are no limits on that right now in this bill. And in addition to that, expedited removal, kind of fast-track deportations, conservatives wanted more of that, and that also is not in this bill.
So in the 30 seconds we have left, Lisa, where is all of this headed?
Right. It's tricky. We expect a vote on this in the Senate on Wednesday. Now, the 3 senators that I talked about are moving hard to try and get those votes. It is uphill even in the Senate, which is amazing because this is the most conservative immigration legislation we've seen in decades, but they're having trouble with Republicans, namely House Speaker Mike Johnson. He doesn't have a Senate vote, of course, but he has influence. Here's what he tweeted out. He said, "This bill is even worse than we expected. If this bill reaches the House, it will be dead on arrival." The hope from senators behind this is that they can turn that around by getting a big Senate vote. Right now, it looks pretty rough. At the same time, we know there's political influence here from Donald Trump and others.
Indeed. Lisa Desjardins, thank you so much for that great reporting.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard what is in the bill. Excuse me. I kind of agree. You give up something to get something. So fast deportations. I don't like that an officer, I don't like that not a judge, but an officer has the power to tell this person that you can't make it in the country without a lawyer. So it still should go back to at least a judge, give them at least 2 weeks. But if that's what it is, then you get the package to Ukraine and Israel. My thing is Israel is trying to cleanse that part of the country, but hey, gotta move as fast as possible. So I think it's an okay bill. The Republicans are going to try to attack it because it's an election year, and it's a win for Biden. A lot of people say that Biden's not doing his job. He passed the infrastructure bill, CHIPS Act, redid the IRS, and now if he gets this, he gets 4. He is good enough for re-election, I say. So let's get some more information on border security.
We return now to the Immigration and National Security Bill. Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut is one of the 3 key senators who negotiated that agreement. He joins me now from Capitol Hill. Senator, welcome back to the NewsHour. Thanks for joining us. My colleague Lisa Desjardins reported earlier on some of the details in that bill. Also reported that House Speaker Johnson says the bill is dead on arrival. Where is the path forward now, and what's your understanding of what House Republicans would agree to at this point?
Well, let's just go back and understand why we're here. Last fall, Democrats tried to pass funding for Ukraine necessary in order to stop Russia from succeeding in their invasion. And Senate Republicans said to us, we're not willing to support Ukraine funding without border provisions. We engaged for 4 months in a good faith negotiation on the border, in part because we know the president needs new authorities to control the number of people who are crossing. And we achieved that agreement that allows the president to shut down parts of the border when crossings get very high, that dramatically reforms the asylum system so that it doesn't take 10 years any longer to get a claim processed. It will now take 6 months, and lets more people into the country legally with an expansion of family and employment visas. But now Republicans seem to be getting cold feet because Donald Trump has said, and his allies in the House have said, we don't want to pass any bipartisan border reform. We'd rather leave the border open and chaotic because it will help President Trump in his upcoming reelection. I still believe that there's enough Republicans of good faith in the Senate that we can get this passed. And if we do, then I think that show of bipartisan support for the border, fixing the border, and Ukraine can maybe unlock a pathway forward in the House.
You've faced some criticism from your fellow Democrats as well, progressives in particular. The caucus chair, Primaies Jayapal, said Democrats are giving in to extremist views. She said President Biden and Senate Democrats have fallen into the same trap again. Are you worried that the bill could alienate your progressive base?
Yeah, listen, there has been nothing done on immigration in Washington in 40 years. And that is because both parties have refused to come to the middle and try to find some common ground. This is an old-fashioned compromise, one that we don't often see in Washington these days, in which there are going to be some Democrats that vote no and a lot more Republicans that vote no. But
common sense, man. This is what we need. common sense in our lives, common sense in our politics.
Achieved, I think, is
Common sense.
important. The reality is this country can't handle 10,000 people coming every day to our southern border with the resources that we have. We shouldn't be okay with an asylum claim taking a decade before it's ultimately processed. So the reforms we're making here are going to make more sense of a broken immigration system. I know it's not everything that the left wants, it's not everything that the right wants, but I think our job is to come here and find these tough compromises.
Well, the bill has some $20 billion for the border, but the bulk of the money is for Ukraine, some $60 billion of what's been called critical funding for their war against Russia. If there's no path forward for this particular bill, how else could you move that aid in some kind of expedited way to Ukraine?
Well, right now, Republicans have not identified any other path, right? The reason why we are talking about these two provisions being put together is because Republicans demanded it. And so we can't forget the reason why we are at this moment. But I think that we need to call Speaker Johnson's bluff. I think he doesn't want the Senate bill to succeed because he knows there would be enormous pressure from some elements of his own caucus that support Ukraine funding to bring it up for a vote in the House. So I just think the Senate needs to do the right thing. The right thing is to support this bipartisan compromise that fixes our border and gets funding to Ukraine. And then hopefully that changes some of the realities in the House. I haven't heard a better plan from any of these Republicans who right now seem to be content to sit on the sidelines and complain and critique, but not actually get in the room as Senator Lankford, Senator Sinema, and myself have.
So to be clear, you think once this passes, if this is able to pass in the Senate, that creates enough pressure to change the dynamics in the House? What have you seen that leads you to believe that could be true?
Well, what I'm saying is that I don't know what the alternative plan is. Speaker Johnson right now is just offering complaints. He's not actually proposing any bipartisan solution to fund Ukraine and fix the border. And the reality is there are two parties in Washington. Republicans don't get to dictate everything that happens here. That's why I reached out to Senator Lankford. That's why he reached out to me. That's why we forged this bipartisan compromise. Until I hear a better idea on how to get a bipartisan compromise, the one we've achieved is the only one that's possible to pass and be signed into law.
Senator, before I let you go, I have to ask about another provision in the bill that includes, we should say, the aid for Gaza, among other places, but it strips funding for UNRWA, which is the United Nations agency that operates inside of Gaza. That's because Israel accused 12 of their employees of being part of the October 7th attacks. But we've heard UNRWA is the only group capable of actually delivering aid on the ground. So is there any other group on the ground that you think could actually get the aid where it needs to go?
So I do. UNRWA has been a very effective group in getting aid to people in need. We're also learning that elements of UNRWA are compromised. This was a demand of Republicans. The only way that they were willing to support any humanitarian aid into Gaza was to strip out the authority for that money to go to UNRWA. We didn't feel like it was the responsible thing to abandon humanitarian aid completely. And we also do know that groups like the Red Crescent, groups like the World Food Program, other smaller not-for-profit actors on the ground can get this key humanitarian aid out. So we believe that we can find good, responsible, vetted partners. We also believe that some of our allies in and around the region and in Europe will be able to help UNRWA keep their operations up and running.
All right, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. Sir, thank you for your time. Good to speak with you.
Yes. That is another thing. Getting aid to the people of Gaza, not Hamas, but the actual people who live in the Gaza, who live in a open air jail for 20 years, and Israel is going to try to genocide and try to take over that era. So we need to watch the right-wing party they're trying to get over a fast one on them. So let's see. One more about border security that the Republicans are not doing.
For the first time in more than a decade, major immigration legislation will come up for a vote later this week on Capitol Hill. In return for Republican votes to pass aid to Ukraine, U.S. senators negotiated changes to the U.S. asylum system and border security policies.
This supplemental package is a real opportunity for Congress to finally address America's borders and make progress towards a more efficient and well-resourced system. It will cut years of delay in the asylum process while ensuring fair outcomes.
The bill would fund an increase in immigration detention capacity from 34,000 to 50,000. It would also end the practice of allowing migrants to remain in the United States while claiming asylum, and would force the U.S. to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border if there is a 7-day rolling average of 5,000 migrant encounters or 8,500 encounters in a single day. The deal also includes $60 billion in aid to Ukraine, $14 billion to Israel, as well as aid to Indo-Pacific countries to fight Chinese aggression. If passed, the legislation would send $10 billion in humanitarian aid to the West Bank, Gaza, and Ukraine.
I've spoken at length for months about the urgent need to invest in American hard power, stand with our allies, and start showing our adversaries that the world's foremost superpower intends to start acting like one again. My colleagues know where I stand. They know as well as I do that American adversaries in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran are working together.
The White House released a statement late Sunday saying President Joe Biden supports the bipartisan agreement. Former President Donald Trump, the current frontrunner for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, said last week he was advising Republican lawmakers about a possible immigration deal.
And a lot of people do call me, they respect me, and they say, what do you think? If the bill's not going to be a great bill and really solve the problem, I wouldn't do it at all. Not for political reasons, just for U.S. reasons.
Speaker Mike Johnson said the bill, if passed, would be dead on arrival in the Republican-majority U.S. House of Representatives, which will move to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas this week, saying he is responsible for a crisis at the border.
The consequences of this crisis have been stark and sobering, and there's hardly a community anywhere in this country that's not felt the impact. But this is, again, a crisis of choice. Those choices were made by those in power, and today the House of Representatives is stepping up and saying no more.
If the bill fails passage in the U.S. House, lawmakers may need to negotiate separate legislation to send aid to Ukraine and Israel. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Yep. So the Republicans are doing the natural thing they do, which is nothing. Absolutely nada. Nothing. So, my 2 cents is it's a compromisable bill. You give money to Taiwan, you give money to Gaza, you give money to Israel, which I don't like, but that's the one of the things that you gotta do is common sense legislation. The Republicans, it's an election year, so they don't want to give Biden a win because it will give Biden a huge win. Again, he passed infrastructure, he passed the CHIPS Act, passed reforming the IRS, or funding the IRS, and immigration. So what will he do in his second term? Maybe he will help African Americans and everybody at home. Inflation is going down, gas is going down. So for all those people that don't want him back in, what more you want? Donald Trump, who wants to give tax breaks to the rich and keep y'all dumb as shit, but hey, it is what it is. Okay, we're gonna move on to the primaries. So what are the primaries? So We're going to explain the primaries to you so we can move forward 2020.
In December of 2007, a U.S. Senator named Barack Obama was running for president. It didn't look like he would beat the well-known frontrunner, Hillary Clinton. She was nearly 20 points ahead of him in the national polls. But then, 1 month later,
a huge victory.
Obama won the Iowa caucus. The Iowa caucus is like an election, but instead of voting in a voting booth, you stand with other people to be counted. It's weird. But it's also the very first contest in America's presidential primary process to determine the two major parties' nominees. And if you win it, it's a big deal.
You have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
Literally overnight, Obama shot up in the polls. Winning Iowa turned him from a long shot candidate to a real possibility. For the last 50 years, Iowa has been a hugely influential part of the presidential primary system. But in 2020, well...
Epic failure.
Meltdown of the vote reporting system.
First, a bunch of technical mishaps delayed the caucus results. Then when the results came out, no one was actually sure if they were correct. And it started to raise questions about whether the Iowa caucus deserves to be so important. The way America's political parties choose their presidential nominees, starting in Iowa and then with 63 other elections on 21 separate days, was kind of set up quickly and without any real thought behind the order. So why do we choose presidents this way? And is there a better way to do it? To understand how we do things now, you have to go back about 50 years. As recently as the 60s, only a few states even held primaries. Most states didn't, and party leaders would just pick the presidential nominee at the convention.
Voters were much more divorced from the process than they are today.
This is Lee. She's been covering the 2020 primaries for Vox.
At that time, the people in charge were effectively picking the people that would stay in charge.
Which mostly worked fine until 1968. In the few primaries that year, young Democrats voted in big numbers for candidates who were against the Vietnam War. But at the convention, the party delegates instead chose the pro-war vice president, who wasn't even on the ballot in the few states that actually held primaries. It did not go over well.
The gas is being spread, it's coming this way, and it's awful.
There was huge pushback to that. The protests were incredibly effective and actually ended up in the changes that we see now.
What changed was the Democratic Party decided to let voters pick the nominee, with elections in each state. Republicans soon followed suit. Today, the delegates from each state still officially vote on the nominee at the convention.
Arizona delivers 58 bound votes.
But they have to vote according to how the candidates did in their state primaries. To win the nomination, a candidate needs a majority of all the delegates. And big states with big populations, like Florida, have lots of delegates for the taking. Small states like Iowa have just a few. But even though it's not a delegate powerhouse, in the sequential primary system, Iowa has a crucial job, as do other small states that vote early in the process. Let's look at the 2016 Republican primary as an example. When the Iowa caucus kicked things off, there were 12 serious candidates on the ballot. After Iowa, 3 immediately dropped out. And after the New Hampshire primary a week later, 3 more dropped out. This is what those early states are there to do.
The early states end up winnowing the field to a slate of what people might consider frontrunners. They help candidates generate hype, press coverage, additional donations.
In other words, instead of the rest of the country having to choose between 12 candidates, early states help the party narrow down its options to just a few viable candidates for the rest of the primaries. That also gives voters in these early states a lot of power. A voter in the earliest state has 5 times the influence on deciding the nominee as a voter just a few weeks later. But here's the problem with that.
So there was no real rationale in the way that these early states were initially determined.
Iowa goes first because in 1972, the first election after the changes, Iowa said they needed a long time to compile their results, so they had to hold their caucus early. And as it's held on to that first spot, Iowa's gotten more and more important. And New Hampshire is the first traditional primary because they have a law saying that they have to be first. Yep, that's it. And the questions around whether these states should go first are not new.
The main problem that people bring up over and over again is that both states are super white. When you look at the actual numeric breakdown, both are about 90% white. So neither of these states is very representative of either the US or the party itself, and that's become a huge concern.
That's partly why in 2008, the parties moved to more diverse states, Nevada and South Carolina, to also be early in the calendar. Then there's Super Tuesday, which started in the 80s when southern states decided to have their primaries at the same time to try to have a bit more influence. Over the years, Super Tuesday has gotten more and more super. In 2020, 1/3 of all delegates will be awarded on this one day. In other words, Super Tuesday has been looking more and more like a national primary. So why not just have a national primary and have everyone vote on the same day? The answer has to do with who would probably win.
If there was a national primary today, whoever has the most money as well as the most name recognition would probably do the best because they're able to reach people and they already have an established backing in place.
Think about that in terms of the 2020 primary. If everyone voted on one day and money and name recognition mattered the most, this is who would probably come out on top. Remember that poll from December 2007? If everyone voted at once, Obama would have lost. Which brings us back to Iowa and New Hampshire.
I won Iowa because I spent 87 days going to every small town and fair and fish fry.
Both Iowa and New Hampshire, they're very accessible, so you can drive around, you can hold events, you can go to the fair and meet with voters, and also their media markets are much cheaper than other larger states like California. Both of those factors make it easier for a candidate who maybe isn't that well known to also make the same type of impression of somebody else who might be, wealthier and more well-resourced.
So the sequential system helps narrow the field, and starting in a small state can help underdog candidates emerge. But should that state be Iowa?
Why start in Iowa? Well, that's the conversation that will absolutely happen after this election cycle.
There have been a bunch of different options floated. One is to change the state that goes first.
So which state should go first? The website 538 tried to figure this out by looking at the racial, ethnic, and educational breakdown of every state to find which one was most representative of the Democratic Party as a whole. Number 1 was Illinois. Iowa was 42nd.
Another option is to actually just move it so that 10 states go in February. That kind of dilutes the influence of Iowa and New Hampshire a little bit. And then another possibility is the idea of rotating. They talked more about rotating regions that would dominate the primary one year and a different region that would dominate the primary a different year.
The way America nominates its presidential candidates isn't set in stone. The political parties can and have changed the process over the years. But it's been a while. Maybe it's time.
Yes, so that is the option of the Democratic primary. And one thing that came about was why Black voters are voting for Trump. South Carolina just had their primary. And they just had their primary. So one thing that was going on was the national poll said that Biden is going to lose a national election to Trump, which I disagree with. That's just me. I just don't like it. So don't pay me no mind, but check this out.
We've seen inflation drop now 2/3. We've seen wages now are up. We're turning the page, we're turning the corner. And again, that's a point of pride and consideration. But one thing that I hope we will consider, when you turn on those anger machines and anger network, when it comes to the issue of guns, Senator, it is remarkable that the number one issue that folks on the right believe is a threat to our kids are drag shows and trans community. Yeah. I'm serious. I mean, just by the amount of time and energy they spend on it, there's got to be the number one issue that's affecting our kids. Not the number one killer of our kids, guns. That's a hell of a statement.
That is Gavin Newsom. He's stopping for Biden. He will probably be the if Biden makes it through his second term, if he wins, I think, knock on wood, Kamala Harris become president for 3 years or 2 years. That's her presidency. And then Gavin Newsom becomes the president in 2028. I think that's how it's looking. All right. This is the one thing I saw. If you didn't know, yeah, he
Where's the concession speech, Dean?
all right. Yes. Biden won South Carolina by 90%. 90%. But there's one thing I don't get. They were saying, this is one thing, I'm going to go to a second piece, but they say black voters in South Carolina are unenthusiastic about their presidential choices. Look who they're asking. For businessmen. Of course. They're not in the bottom tier, but listen to it.
There's some people in your orbit who are either voting for Donald Trump or considering it?
For sure. A lot of my friends are obviously my age, so we're a little younger. We've only voted once, for a president. And Trump is kind of all we know. And they're Trump and Biden. They're like, well, we were broke with Biden. We weren't with Trump. And that's kind of the only thing that I'm hearing over and over again, is that Trump, we had money. Well, okay.
Kids are dumb. And they don't understand that under Trump, he put them in serious debt. Serious debt. But we're going to
his narrowly trailing Trump.
I passed that for 1 second, yeah, because the national polls always say that Biden will lose he lose by 6 points if he goes up against Trump. But check this out.
So then, Chairman, should the president be concerned then with new NBC News polling showing his approval rating at an all-time low, 37%, and his narrowly trailing Trump?
Well, listen, Jonathan, you know how I feel about polls. The polls also said that Joe Biden was only going to get 69% of the vote in South Carolina yesterday. He got 96%. The best way to predict how people will vote is to look at how they're actually voting. Last night, Joe Biden beat the polls in South Carolina, and he got a major vote. And it was a major show of strength and enthusiasm for the president. And
he won by 90. So I'm not really feeling this narrative that he is going to lose. But check this out.
He did push back against some of the narratives that I've been hearing in recent weeks. The gentleman named Haley Hall, who's a librarian here, kind of made it plain in a way that I think spoke to a lot of voters. Take a listen. There's been a lot of talk about voter excitement or lack thereof. People either checking out or checking in, coming out to vote for the Democrat today. What got you out here? Were you driven by any excitement at all? How are you feeling about Joe Biden? Tell me about it.
I think Joe Biden's doing a great job with all the things that he's doing, whether it's the economy or improving our relationships internationally. I think he's doing a lot for us, and I want to show my support for him.
That is the one thing that you hear from folks who actually are plugged into the issues and aware of what the administration has done. There just seems to be a disconnect between that positive message that resonates with him and some other folks who clearly are unaware of some of that progress. But again, that kind of voter is the kind that showed up today, those who are informed and mission-driven.
Okay, so I reached out to DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison before we went on the air saying, I'm going to be on between 7 and 9, any tidbits you can give me. And just before this panel started, he sent me this text message, and he said I could attribute it to him. Early vote numbers, 13% more black than 2020. 13% more black than 2020. 2020 was a presidential election year. That was when Joe Biden's campaign hobbled into South Carolina, having won no state. But anybody who was paying attention to South Carolina in 2020 knew that that was going to be the first opportunity for black voters to tell the rest of the country who they thought should be the Democratic nominee, and they made it clear that that person should be Joe Biden. And according to the DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, this year, in a year when it's not really a contested primary, even though Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips are in the race, and also, as Kornacki pointed out several times, that we don't have an analogous year to point to because the president is an incumbent, sends a very clear message, I think, should send a very clear message to us in the press, it should send a clear message to folks in the Democratic Party, and it should send a message to the nation that President Biden is on firm ground when it comes to the foundation of the Democratic Party, and therefore the foundation of his support going into November.
Yeah, hopefully he keeps it going and wins the Electoral College and the popular vote, because it will be a shame for him to do all this good work him. Yeah, because he's doing again, I think he's a good job. I mean, a good job with, with the people who are, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit lost for words. He's doing a good job as the president. I think he deserves a second term. The second term would give Kamala Harris experience of being president. Okay, so here's an example of a misleading headline, because when I saw it, it said it's consistent, but Trump maintains a consistent national lead over Biden. It's by 6 points, but I really don't think it's possible. But listen.
Can go ahead and start with and put this up there on the screen. I mean, this is one of those where one of the worst signs for Joe Biden yet. In the latest NBC News poll, Donald Trump is leading Joe Biden at 47 to 42%. And the top line number there for Trump is actually gone up since November. Joe Biden's number's gone down by 2. Let's go to the next part, please, because this is equally important, where you can see the approval rating in an NBC News poll at the start of re-election for everyone for the last 20 years. George W. Bush started off in 2004 at 54%. He was riding off the high of his post 9/11 approval. Barack Obama in 2012 had a 49% approval rating. Donald Trump had a 46% approval rating. Joe Biden coming in at 37%. He's putting up Jimmy Carter level numbers in his year out ahead of the overall election in 2024. And Harry Enton, who works over at CNN, he's actually a pretty good polling analyst, flagged something which I think is probably the most important data point of this. This is the first time that a Republican for president has held a consistent lead in national polling since 2004, which is absolutely stunning. Crystal, I mean, there's a couple of things that we should go through here, and we're going to cover some of the pluses and the minuses, I guess, Today will be the minus side for Joe Biden. Approval rating, dismal. Approval rating, though, is not necessarily equal to the overall votes. As we saw, Trump could have a 46. You could still lose the overall electoral college. One of the problems, though, is that for Democrats, the ability to win the popular vote has been a foregone conclusion since 2004. Trump is now currently in a position, polling-wise, we don't know whether that's accurate, where he does appear as if he may be able to edge out in the popular vote. Given that Republicans actually have a -2 popular vote advantage in the overall electoral college, that's the worst possible position, I think you could say fairly, for Joe Biden, especially when we think about it on a state-by-state level. The only counter case I could give to this is that, look, every election is unique, and I know that sounds trite, but H.W. Bush, in 1991, had a 90-some approval rating after the Gulf War, and he still went on to lose the 1992 campaign.
Yeah.
So it's not always one-to-one, but historically, that's more of an aberration than it is the norm. The norm is that when people disapprove of your handling on the economy, your overall job performance, and you're losing in almost every single national poll, then you're not doing so well. At the same time, special elections, every time people go to the ballot, they don't seem to be going Republican. So I don't know. I just want to present the fair picture of where we're
I
standing.
think the other counter you would say is what's unusual about this election is you basically have two incumbents going up against each other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Donald Trump also has a very low approval rating. So what do you make of that? I mean, I do think it is this bizarre situation where most of the country would say there's nothing I would like less than this rematch to occur, and yet we're staring down the exact rematch that is like the nightmare scenario for the majority of Americans. I think you have a situation where if it was almost any other just sort of normal run-of-the-mill Democrat, they would beat Trump. I think if you had any normal like run-of-the-mill Republican, they would beat Joe Biden. And so it really is a test of like, who does the country hate more? Who are they more dissatisfied with? Who are they more uncomfortable with leading the country going forward? Chaos under Trump, or, you know, someone who is incredibly aged and showing that age and declining on a daily basis to the point that he won't even sit for, you know, basic interviews and is effectively hidden by his team from the American people. And this is very, very, very apparent to people.
Yeah.
They've been telling pollsters routinely every single time they're asked, yes, I think Joe Biden is too old, and not just Republicans and not just independents. Democrats felt that way and feel that way as well. And yet here we are, you know, with an incumbent president deciding to run for re-election in spite of the fact that the American people overwhelmingly feel like he is not really up to another 4 years. So that's kind of the bottom line of this choice here. And, you know, I feel like there's just a level of denial and insanity on the Democratic side. We might cover this clip tomorrow in the show. Dean Phillips finally got asked to go on MSNBC after, you know, he announced 4 months ago. They never once had him on until after Joe Biden has basically like totally locked up the Democratic nomination, just completely romped in South Carolina. Then they decide to have Dean Phillips on, and they're like, why aren't you doing better? You know, if Democrats want another choice, why aren't you doing better in the polls? And he's like, you literally didn't even tell people that I exist. I have 5% name approval because they did so much to shut down any concept among the Democratic base that there was any option available other than Joe Biden. And at the same time, they're saying that it is mission critical and absolutely existential that Donald Trump be defeated. Yet they're putting up this guy who is like the weakest, lamest, worst candidate you could possibly have in there to try to beat Donald Trump. So it is a real level of insanity that has taken hold in the Democratic Party, where they have just anointed this man who is so incredibly weak, and where people feel so nervous about the idea of whether he can even make it through another 4 years.
Absolutely. And just to underscore this, one of the key themes of some of the things we'll talk about right now are somehow Biden, his lack of strength doesn't just come from independent voters or from Republican overperformance or enthusiasm. He's losing key parts of his own coalition. MSNBC, shockingly, aired some comments from black voters that they at least were probably taken by surprise, where they aired some of the criticism of Biden, and not only that, about why Trump support, at least marginally amongst black men, is beginning to increase. Here's what they had to say.
Some appeal there for some black men with Trump. What is it?
Money. Yeah. I mean, you know, Donald Trump has a reputation of being the money man. So
He's
I
fucking
just
great.
think that Donald Trump, in spite of all the craziness he may have in his head, reading some of the things that he talks about with business, I can kind of agree with as far as business-wise, because
businesses in
I'm trying to grow my business.
A lot of people admire the persona, and they want to be
He's
him.
fucking white.
You know, they want to enjoy the perks that he has. He seems to always be able to circumvent the rules.
He is fucking white, and the rules were not made for black people. Please get educated. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe.
You're hearing that too, that there's some people in your orbit who are either voting for Donald Trump or considering it?
For sure. A lot of my friends are obviously my age, so we're a little younger. We've only voted once, you know, for a president. And Trump is kind of all we know. And they're kind of Trump and Biden. They're like, well, we were broke with Biden. We weren't with Trump. And that's kind of the only thing that I'm hearing over and over again is that, well, Trump, we had money. Well, okay, I hear you guys, but personally, morally, I couldn't see myself.
Hey, very honest, I think, in terms of that portrayal. With Trump, we had money. Actually. With Biden, we're broke. I mean, listen, people are pocketbook voters. Are all people like that? No, not necessarily. As we saw in the 2022 midterms, people did not vote with the economy as number one on their mind. They voted with abortion and with Stop the Steal, very much so in order to have Democratic overperformance. So again, I can sit here and I can make the case every single which way, but I do think that there is a major peril there for Biden, both within his coalition. Second to that is a lot of what's happening right now with Israel, with younger voters. Let's put this up there on the screen. Politico's Jonathan Martin, who's a very astute political columnist, wrote this just yesterday, quote, "Forget no labels. Biden's third-party peril is on the left. Young Democrats who are finding U.S. support for the Netanyahu war effort is untenable, potentially costing the president millions of liberal votes." And the major headline actually out of that is that, quote, "The latter is to include a multi-pronged offensive that will currently launch soon against Kennedy, Jill Stein, and Cornel West, some of which will come from the campaign, some from outside entities. We will set this up directly. It is us versus them. Us is voting for us, them voting for a third party or Trump," as one Biden official has put it to me. So in other words, I believe that is called vote blue no matter who.
Voter shaming.
Crystal,
That's
voter
the
shaming
whole plan.
definitely worked against Jill Stein voters and others. And look, I mean, at a certain point, I think people who are young in particular, and that's one thing that young black gentleman in the clip did resonate with me, is he's like, listen, you know, I'm a young guy. Trump is kind of all we know. And, you know, we've been covering politics, and I think about it for so long, even though I'm only 31, almost 32, is that it's been 7 years. That's a long time, you know? And before that, it was Obama. It doesn't feel like, Trump in many ways been around since 2011 with the birther conspiracy and has been kind of the center of a lot of our politics for so long that people no longer want to believe some of the myths and other things that are out there. Now, it might be true that the suburban, you know, moms and white men, college educated and others may definitely be swayed by the Trump as an existential threat and others. But I think key parts of the Democratic coalition don't want to be shamed anymore. Younger people who voted for Bernie Sanders, younger people and others who I've met, you know, who voted for Jill Stein.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're ready to jump on this. They're like, I've seen this movie so many times. Why should I believe you?
Yeah.
I think that's a potent, thing.
Let me stop this here, because they are part of the problem. They're not telling you that this motherfucker put us in debt. 4 years. 4 years. Put $8 trillion, $8 trillion out our deficit in 4 years. Again, let me repeat, $8 trillion. Let me know how many wins he's got. Like I said, hopefully these people will not fall asleep at the wheel, because that shit would be really fucked up if they actually put Trump back in, because he is not the answer. So let's see the support for Biden, and we're going to wrap up shortly.
I'm not expecting any huge shifts right here, but you want to see out of curiosity, is this going to stay at 97? Is it going to fall down to anything like that? So what I'm seeing, though, big picture, just county to county, like I said, we've got a range now of counties that are reporting substantial vote here. As I said, the 3 counties with the lowest proportions of black voters in the entire state, we've got results. We've got a lot of results from all 3 of those, and Biden's running 96, 97% in all of them. We've also got results from some majority black counties as well here. Biden, again, running 97, 98, 96% in that ballpark. I'm looking to see if there's any turnout imbalance so far between them. What I'm seeing so far, this is just broad math here. We have to dive into it a little bit more later. But they're all running about a third, a little bit more than a third of their 2020 level in terms of turnout. All these counties seem to be. So, 2020, obviously a high interest year. Just put this in some perspective. I have the turnout totals here. This is old voter data, but I want to show you. This is turnout in South Carolina Democratic primaries. This was the first one back in 1992. Like we said, we're kind of flying blind. We don't have a Democratic primary when an incumbent's been running to compare turnout to. We have competitive Democratic primaries here. You can see the Kerry year, the Obama year, Clinton, Sanders. That was Biden in 2020. So if you end up at about a third, of the 2020 number, that's going to take you to about 180,000. It gets very, very rough right now. We want to get full results from these counties, but right now, they seem to be running about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third. That'd be about 180,000 turnout. So you can put that in some perspective. Those, high interest years of 20 and 8, these are all contested, very contested primaries. 16, 2004, John Kerry, John Edwards. And this is where it would fall if it runs at about a third, 180,000. 1992, again, that was Bill Clinton. That was the first. South Carolina had been a caucus state. That was the first year they went to a primary on the Democratic side. But that's about where that would clock in. And again, we just don't have, it's tough for me to say, is that a great number for Democrats? Does that say anything about enthusiasm? The big thing these results are just shouting is there's no appetite among Democratic voters for a contested primary for Joe Biden. Right. When he's winning New Hampshire, the ultimate high interest, high voter turnout primary state on write-ins with 2/3 of the vote, and now he's getting a number like this in South Carolina. Right now, it's not screaming anything immediate to me about turnout. It's just screaming to me that every Democrat who basically bothered to turn out today is sort of delivering a message, we're good to go for the general election.
Yeah, good to go.
Yeah, that's the turnout. And hopefully we get the result. All right. Today we talked about the border bill, primary, Biden's wins. So this has been the Common Sense Party Podcast. I'm your host, Dottley. Our mission is to bring common sense issues to our citizens. Rate us, review us. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Follow, rate, review, give us 5 stars, give us 4 stars, give us 3 stars, give us 2 stars, give us any stars. If you don't give us any stars, I'll just assume I'm doing it probably. But we are available where you get your podcast. We are at Spotify, Amazon Music, Samsung Podcast, Pandora, Google Podcast, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and YouTube Music. You can also support via Zelle or Cash App. The information is on our Spotify About page. You can also contact us at the Common Sense Party Podcast. We're also available on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Again, please go out and vote, because this one is more important. And also, don't let them fool you that if you put Trump back in, things will get better. They will just get worse. Right now, we're turning the corner to prosperity, and we might get a female black president the next time. So let's turn out. Georgia will be starting on the 14th. I'll be working on it. And again, thank you. Thank you for listening. Tell a friend to tell a friend.